A lot has been made about Jonathan Kuminga potentially becoming a Chicago Bull and how that will work out and fit for the Chicago Bulls. But on today's episode, I want to talk about another guy that will I view as a low risk, potentially a high reward prospect in Cam Whitmore of the Houston Rockets. And I'm going to explain why I believe the Chicago Bulls should target Cam Whitmore over Jonathan Kuminga on today's episode. But before we talk about it, break it all down, you gotta hear the music first.
Cognac, gang.
Shy Bulls podcast with the Cognac Boys. I'm Cognac Boy Bobby, and I'm holding it down on today's daily episode. So if you tuned in with me today, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell as well. Man, let's get into it. Now, we already been hearing reports, and we pretty much seen it with our own eyes that the Golden State Warriors are not too kind of having Jonathan Kuminga on their franchise right now to being a part of the team. You've seen in this year's playoffs before Steph Curry went down, they pretty much just moved him on to the side and say, hey, young fella, go ahead and have a nice seat on the bench. And then he eventually got some run when Steph Curry went down, and they had to go ahead and then say, all right, maybe you can give us something, but it doesn't necessarily work if we have Steph Curry on our court. And we also seen and heard several reports come out there and place Jonathan Kuminga as being one of those sign and trade candidates for the Golden State Warriors and linking that to our Chicago Bulls. Now, according to the Athletics' Kelly Eco, he reported about Cam Whitmore saying this: a handful of teams have inquired about the availability of Rockets wing Cam Whitmore. Since being drafted with the number 20 pick in 2023, Whitmore has struggled to entrench himself in head coach Ime Udoka's tight rotation, and at times has expressed his displeasure at the end of the bench, but there is still optimism about his potential and rotation spots, having showed strong periods of play over the last 2 seasons. That was according to my man's Kelly Eco. Hope I'm saying the last name right. But the point is that if the Chicago Bulls are still going on with their belief that they want to acquire young players with the experience, I believe Cam Whitmore could potentially fit that criteria and be a good candidate to explore and trade opportunities for the Chicago Bulls. Now, I think that when you look at both players, you say that both players are comparable in a lot of ways. And I think it starts with the stats, man. I'm bringing it up on the screen for you all to see. And if you're over there on the other side, on the podcast side, tune in on the YouTube side so you can check out some of these stats, but listen in if you can't get to it. Now, this is the stats that I pulled up from last season, the 2024-2025 regular season, no playoffs included. And you see that Cam Whitmore played 51 games, Jonathan Kuminga played 47. And they kind of compared and fared out in the same way. Yes, Jonathan Kuminga leads pretty much every statistical category over Cam Whitmore in points with 15 versus 9 over Cam Whitmore, rebounds with 4.6 over 3 rebounds, and then 2 assists versus 1, and then just got about a point, just a couple points over in steals with 0.8, 0.1 over blocks, and then shooting 45% from the field, while Cam Whitmore shot 44% from the field. But then Cam Whitmore comes in as a better 3-point shooter at 35%, a better free throw shooter at 75%, and then an efficiency field goal percentage at 52%, while Jonathan Kuminga averaged out at 30% from the 3, 66% from the free throw line, respectively, if we're just comparing those stats and looking at those guys. I will like to mention that Jonathan Kuminga did play way more minutes, about 6 or 7 more minutes per game than my man's Cam Whitmore. And then you seen that both players, they had their struggles, but they do have some things that they can bring onto the team. But why am I looking at this entire situation and saying that Cam Whitmore could potentially be a better target for the Chicago Bulls? It starts with the money. If you look at Cam Whitmore, he's still on his rookie deal. He's only been in the league 2 years and still has 2 years left on the deal. And then eventually will become a restricted free agent after those 2 years, only bringing in 3 years in this upcoming season, and then for about $5 million the following year. While Jonathan Kuminga right now is looking for some money, he's looking for a payday, and with what that payday might entice or what that payday may look like could be somewhere between the 18 and $30 million range. I just want to throw out a wide range out there, not necessarily understanding or knowing what it will look like for Jonathan Kuminga in a sign and trade opportunity for him. But I would imagine that his agent and and his side, they're going to do a lot of different things to try to figure out how can they get the most money for this young player. And we see that when it comes to stat wise, they are pretty much comparable, you know what I'm saying, in a number of aspects. Again, want to mention the caveat is that Jonathan Kuminga played more minutes than Cam Whitmore. If he had more minutes, will the stats look different? Possibly, but I'm not going to go ahead and say that it absolutely will. But there could have been a chance that the stats look a little bit more better when it comes from your point totals, your rebounds, your assists, if Cam Whitmore saw a lot more opportunity. But I think that if you're trading for Jonathan Kumingas, that means that you're going to have to cough up some money on. And I don't necessarily know if the Chicago Bulls want to get into that right now. Potentially they will, simply because there's some things that you will like about Jonathan Kuminga, like his athleticism, like some of the things he could do defensively. Maybe not the greatest defender, but if you're looking at certain stat totals and comparing that to Cam Whitmore, he is rated a better defender than Cam Whitmore. So take that for what it really is. I think it's just Cam Whitmore is probably like a 110, 112, if I remember correctly. And then Jonathan Kuminga is at like a 108. So not a huge difference, but there is some type of difference between both of these defensive players. Now, when you look at Jonathan Kuminga, who fell off to the wayside, you look at him, and if you took time to watch the Golden State Warriors, you can see that there were some times to where Jonathan Kuminga was a bit erratic. You know what I'm saying? Not necessarily understanding what Steve Kerr wanted him to do on the basketball court on the offensive side, not necessarily being in place on the defensive side, maybe having some moments of where he was not aggressive enough or a good enough three-point shooter to help out the offense of what they wanted to bring. And then you look on the flip side of Cam Whitmore with the limited minutes that he had for the Houston Rockets, you see that, there was some things that he definitely has to work on. But this is only a guy that's been in the league for 2 seasons. And then you see that he still brings in the same type of athleticism that Jonathan Kuminga has. Maybe some may say that Jonathan Kuminga is a bit more athletic, but I wouldn't think that it's by a wide margin, just me personally. But I think that both guys could bring you some relatively similar things to the table if you were to explore the options. I think both guys, if you check height, and they're pretty much damn near the same size, that 6'7", 6'8", in that range. Jonathan Kuminga does have the wider wingspan. I don't know how much we care about that, but I think it definitely does help out when you want to talk about defense, get it in the passing lanes, being able to cause deflections, being able to go out there and create blocks. But if you look at Cam Whitmore, all those things are panning out well for him with his size and his length, as when we talk about wingspan. And I think that when you look at Jonathan Kuminga, he was supposed to be a major part of the Warriors' future, and he fell to the wayside. That does not mean he's still not a solid player to explore. It's just saying that, hey, it did not work out for the Golden State Warriors, who typically can be able to navigate well with some of their players that they elect to push forward. Because if we go back and look at the Golden State Warriors and we look at how they went out there and drafted James Wiseman, it did not work out for them over there in Golden State. I believe he went on over there to Detroit Pistons, and he ended up, doing okay, but then suffering an injury to where we really didn't see much of him after that. And Cam Whitmore, look, this is a guy that's been pushed off to the side, rightfully so, because you had guys like Jabari Smith step up, and then you got a number of guys, Tyree Eason, just to name a few, who pretty much offered a little bit more than a Cam Whitmore. So I think that when you go out there and you look at Jonathan Kuminga's situation and saying, hey, Jonathan Kuminga is a solid, I think he could potentially be a solid fit for the Chicago Bulls, just because what he can bring and the amount of experience he has in the league, versus a Cam Whitmore who has some experience, but not to the extent of a Jonathan Kuminga in the league. So I think that's where it can become, a thing to where you absolutely have to navigate this situation. You absolutely have to look into this situation. But I think that what separates and makes sense for me to go out there and look at Cam Whitmore a little bit more is simply because the money it's going to be the number one thing. We already hearing if they the Chicago Bulls explore or lock in Josh Giddey, there's a potential that Kobe White can be on the move. So why not go in and try to see if there's some type of agreement or some type of interest, if it fits well for the Chicago Bulls, or if it makes sense in the front office's mind to explore Cam Whitmore, who's not going to cost you much moving forward. I don't necessarily know if both teams want to just go, shopping at that low of a rate. Maybe, what I'm saying, maybe go and entertain and some type of things like that. Would it cost the Chicago Bulls some type of draft assets? That'll be some type of interesting thing to throw out there and consider, especially when you think about, hey, this is a former first round pick, maybe could still potentially come in and fill out a role, especially if the rumors bold true that, hey, we might be receiving Kevin Durant or going after Giannis Antetokounmpo. I believe that they shot down the Kevin Durant stuff, but Giannis Antetokounmpo could come into play for the Houston Rockets, and Cam Whitmore might be one of those players being moved in that trade as just kind of like some salary fillers for the Milwaukee Bucks and the Houston Rockets to execute that trade successfully. But I still think that when you talk about the money, you talk about the athletic ability, you talk about things that you have not seen from him, he could be a guy that you could absolutely bring on a team and see what he could provide the Chicago Bulls at a low risk, high reward type of situation. Now, if you go and you look at Jonathan Kuminga, my mindset is, look, this man, he could potentially be on a sign and trade, depending on how that money looks. That means, hey, you gonna have to cough up some money on, and we know that politics come into the NBA floor all the time with guys making money, and then you absolutely feel like you have to seek a return for said guys because you're paying them X amount of money. Hence why we're still seeing views of Patrick Williams, and that's not no shot at him right now. It's just to say that at this particular moment, when you pay certain guys, you're going to give them every opportunity to go out there and see if you can get something in return for your investment in said player. And I think that could potentially be what happens here with Jonathan Kuminga. And I think both guys could fit well with the Chicago Bulls at that forward spot. I think both of them can come in and play next to Montes Buzelis, who I expect is now going to have every opportunity to do damn well for the Chicago Bulls moving forward. But obviously, it's going to be on Montes Buzelis. But I look at the low risk, high reward type of thing instead of just flat out saying, yeah, Jonathan Kuminga, we going to pay you all his money. And then if it doesn't work out, it will be difficult to move off of him years down the line. So that's why I'm thinking if you go and you get Cam Whitmore for a total of $8 million for 2 years and it doesn't work out, you can wipe your hands clean with it with an $8 million loss. Versus if you're paying Jonathan Kuminga, let's just say $20 million per year, just to throw on the low end, and you say, hey man, it's really not working out. Who wants to take calls on Jonathan Kuminga? Now you put yourself in a little bit of a tougher situation. It's not like you can't move off of Jonathan Kuminga if he does not work out for the Chicago Bulls, but it definitely will make it a little bit more harder to accept if Jonathan Kuminga does not pan out. But I think both guys are very, very intriguing as prospects for the Chicago Bulls. And we'll see what happens. Because I think that if you do go and try to execute a sign and trade for Jonathan Kuminga, that offers you a way to either move off of Nikola Vucevic. And I don't necessarily know how the Golden State Warriors feel about a Patrick Williams, but that can be something that happens that a lot of us Chicago Bulls fans want to see versus you trying to inquire about my man's Cam Whitmore and potentially not being able to move off some of those heavier pieces that you want to move off of, like your Nikola Vucevic's, and now being thrown into the mix, your Alonzo Ball. Maybe Alonzo Ball type of thing could come into play with either situation, but we just got to wait and see. But I definitely still feel that Cam Whitmore is a better player to go out there and explore in a trade versus a Jonathan Kuminga right now. I think that he still has time to grow, still very young in his development for the NBA. And I think that it'll be a low risk, high reward type of thing. We're talking about money again. We're talking about potential fit for both players. And we'll see what happens, man. We'll see what happens. But just wanted to throw out there that I feel like Cam Whitmore could be a better option for the Chicago Bulls than a Jonathan Kuminga. But I would love to hear what you have to say. Let me know how you feeling about this on today's topic. Do you feel that the Chicago Bulls should explore Cam Whitmore a little bit more, or do you feel like Jonathan Kuminga will be the better fit for the Chicago Bulls simply because both players have pretty much been shoved to the side, so there could be some type of leverage that the Chicago Bulls have if they do things correctly. But when have they done things correctly over these last few years? So we'll leave that up for them. But hey, that is it for me today, man. I appreciate y'all for tuning in into another episode. Before you get up out of here, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell as well, man. Thank y'all so much. Make sure y'all always see red, and y'all already know. I'm going to catch y'all on the next one, for sure.
Cognac. Gang.